Greetings. This is the one you've known as Jesus the Christ. I hope I've made a case for how untrue and unhelpful fearful thoughts are, and also for the fact that the things you're afraid of, such as death, poverty, failure, loss, aging, and illness, are not and don't have to be the difficult experiences you suppose them to be. Your own mind makes things that are a natural part of life scary and upsetting. With the right attitude and perspective toward these experiences, they don't have to cause suffering. You can learn to see them from your soul's perspective, which is the perspective I've been sharing with you. And you can accept them and grow from them, which you might as well do. But when you're gripped with fear, what do? In this chapter, I'll offer some suggestions for working with fear once it's gained a foothold. Being gripped by fear is a very contracted state and quite dysfunctional. Fear interferes with your ability to function and access your God-given inner resources. Fear doesn't have anything to offer. The proof that fear isn't helpful is that it feels bad. The most functional states feel good. You're the most functional when you're happy, at peace, and relaxed. This is self-evident. Nevertheless, if you're afraid, there's a tendency to feel or believe that you need to be afraid, or at least that there's nothing you can do about it. But of course that isn't true. You don't need to be afraid, and you can do something about it when you are. If you were never afraid again, you'd be perfectly safe. Even if your life is threatened, fear doesn't save you. In the end, it's your wits, your wisdom, or maybe your feet that will save you. So what can be done about this emotion? The first thing I'm going to suggest is very simple and yet very important, as it's often enough to turn your experience of fear around. When you feel afraid, instead of thinking or saying, "I'm afraid," just note, fear is arising. That's the truth. Personalizing fear by claiming it as yours turns fear into a problem that you need to do something about. The truth is more likely the opposite. When you're afraid, the best action is probably none at all, unless you're actually being physically threatened in that moment. However, most fear is not of that sort. Most fears are of something you've simply imagined. Since fear divorces you from the wisdom of your true self, actions motivated by fear don't tend to be aligned with that wisdom or necessary. There's actually no I that fear or any other emotion belongs to. The emotion just is. Emotions come and go within the body-mind, and you are not the body-mind. It's not your emotion, just as your thoughts are not really yours. Both thoughts and emotions arise and fall within the body-mind, which is the vehicle that makes it possible for consciousness to experience and act in the world. Like a car that allows you to go places you couldn't go before, your body-mind is simply a fleshy vehicle that allows consciousness to have experiences it couldn't have before. And like a car without a driver, the body-mind has no potential to function without the consciousness that animates it. You are not the body-mind, but the consciousness that's aware of the arising and falling of thoughts and emotions within the body-mind. Your body-mind has certain conditioning that produces such thoughts and emotions, but you didn't put that conditioning there. You aren't responsible for that conditioning, nor do you need to try to get rid of it or fix it. Nevertheless, there is a natural process within every human being that's working to evolve any negative and untrue conditioning. Everyone is evolving toward greater freedom from the constraints and limitations of their unhelpful conditioning, and life brings each person the means for this. Suffering is the primary teacher. The way to fix your fear, if you will, is to simply notice your fearful thoughts as they arise. If you notice a fearful thought before it turns into a fearful emotion, you'll have saved yourself from that experience. This takes a lot of mastery over the mind, but on the road to enlightenment, everyone eventually learns to do this. So the first line of defense in relation to fear or any other emotion is to become aware of the thoughts that might cause that emotion to blossom if those thoughts are believed. If you can be aware of a thought, the tendency to immediately identify with it is interrupted. You'll be able to experience a thought as a thought instead of as my thought. Then you have some choice around it, and you can choose to not feed it with your attention. However, once a thought becomes my thought, then it's empowered to move to the next stage, which is to become an emotion. Identification with thoughts and emotions, experiencing them as my thoughts and emotions, is the cause of suffering. Those who are enlightened don't do this, and so they don't suffer. It's not that those who are enlightened don't have thoughts or even some emotions, but those thoughts and emotions aren't identified with, and so don't cause suffering. This is interesting, isn't it? That simple identification is what causes people to be unhappy and suffer. Without identification with thoughts and emotions, it's possible to experience life quite differently, and life is good. This is the secret to happiness and the key to enlightenment. Freedom from suffering is the reward for breaking identification with one's mind. I would be remiss if I didn't tell you how to do this in the most efficient way possible. Meditation. Meditation is the practice of noticing thought but not identifying with it. As you practice this skill, as with any other skill, disidentification with thought becomes easier and more automatic. Meditation will change your life because it changes your relationship to thoughts. It actually changes your brain, and in so doing changes how you are in life. Meditation will help you stay centered and functioning from the prefrontal cortex rather than from the lower brain, the aspect of the brain reflective of the ego and responsible for fight or flight. You'll still be able to flee perfectly well if need be, I guarantee. I won't say much more about meditation here, since I and this author have written about it elsewhere, except to say that if you're serious about your spiritual growth and about getting beyond fear, then meditate. Do it once a day for at least an hour. If a thought or thoughts have slipped past your awareness and you've identified with them and now you feel afraid, there are a number of things you can do to weaken this identification and free yourself from this emotion. First, you have to become aware that you feel afraid. The sooner you become aware of this, the better, as the fear still hasn't taken root to the extent that it will if you remain identified with it longer. Emotions tend to snowball, but if you can notice that you're having an emotion before it's gained strength, you're at an advantage. The hardest fears to disidentify with are ones that have become so strong that the body is reacting as if there is a real live threat. Once the fight or flight response has been activated, it's difficult to convince the mind that the feeling of fear isn't based on anything real. The body's sensations reinforce the imaginary fearful thought and make it seem true and like a real problem. It's not that easy for most people to be aware of and objective about their feelings. They might express that they're afraid or angry, but this is usually from a place of identification, which only strengthens that emotion. Most people aren't able to gain enough distance from their feelings to be rational about them. Most simply respond to their emotions automatically without questioning their responses or making a conscious choice about them. So, developing an awareness of your emotions and objectivity toward them, just as with thoughts, is critical in overcoming fear. Meditation also accomplishes this because it develops one's ability to stand back from emotions and notice what's happening, instead of being drawn in by them and responding automatically from one's conditioning. Most people are quite unconscious and don't question their thoughts, emotions, or behavior. You can perhaps imagine what a different world this would be if people were more aware and chose more consciously how to behave. What is capable of choosing more wisely and overriding the conditioning is the true self. And thankfully, the true self is kind, considerate, patient, loving, and peaceful. If people's true selves were choosing how to behave, then you'd have a kind and peaceful world. Right now, the ego's in charge, and it isn't pretty. Once you're able to bring some awareness to the fear or any other emotion that's grabbed you, what you do next to help that emotion relax and release is counterintuitive. It's counterintuitive because human beings are programmed to resist their emotions. They want to get rid of them. But that isn't helpful, since, as everyone knows by now, what you resist persists. And that's true. The alternative to resisting is letting everything come and go. When you apply this wisdom to fear or any other emotion, this simply means letting an emotion be there. Let it be the way it is, without pushing it away or wanting it to be any different than it is. If you want it to go away, just notice that desire and return to just letting the emotion be the way it is. When you allow something to just be, it relaxes and naturally dissipates. Isn't this also how an emotional exchange between two people is diffused? When you let someone else's emotions just be, without engaging emotionally yourself or disagreeing with or trying to change the other person, those emotions dissipate because you haven't given them any fuel. Emotions can't survive and thrive in a neutral, accepting, and kind environment. They need other emotions to keep going and to build. If you aren't contributing emotions to an emotional situation, the emotions that are there can't be maintained. It takes two to tango, or tangle, as they say. The same is true with your own emotions. If you meet them with kindness, peace, compassion, acceptance, and allowing, they naturally relax and dissipate. And because you aren't reinforcing them, they're likely to arise less frequently and strongly. You may not want to be with an emotion this way. The ego doesn't want to. But this isn't hard to do. How hard is it to just sit with an emotion and notice it, just experience it? That's all you have to do. Notice what it's like. What is the experience like in your body? An emotion such as fear is just a set of sensations in the body. It's the stories attached to an emotion that make you want to get rid of it, but the sensations themselves are not a problem. If you stop giving your attention to the stories fueling the fear, the sensations will die down. Even if all you ever do with fear or other emotions is sit with them and allow them and experience them in your body, that's enough. Just do this consistently every time a fear or other emotion arises. And be patient, because emotions can take a long time to extinguish. You may have to sit with the fear hundreds of times in this way, but each time it arises, it will be a little weaker. This works in part because if you're giving your full attention to the bodily sensations of fear in the here and now, then you won't be giving your attention to the imaginary stories conjured up by the mind that fuel the fear, which is so painful and difficult to deal with. This is the other advantage to giving your attention to the bodily experience of an emotion. Moving your attention to the here and now and out of involvement with the voice in your head is the recipe in every moment for freedom from suffering and true happiness. Even if you don't stop a moment and sit with the sensations of an emotion, but simply move your attention away from the voice in your head onto the overall experience of your body and senses, or of something else in the here and now, that will diffuse an emotion. Being with the sensations of an emotion is not the only way to diffuse it. Any time you stop identifying with the stream of thoughts behind an emotion and get involved in doing something in the here and now, lose yourself in doing something, an emotion will fade and recede. It's just that taking time to sit with the sensations of an emotion also has the potential to heal it more permanently. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, without a practice of meditation, letting go of thoughts enough to get lost in an activity is easier said than done. People who are regularly gripped by fear and other emotions are the least likely to be able to do this. A further catch is that meditation is especially difficult for these people, but that's all the more reason for them to find a way to get over that resistance and meditate anyway. For many, meditation is really the only way out. While you're sitting with the sensations of an emotion, there are other things you can do to work with recurring and particularly difficult emotions, such as fear. One of these is inquiry. You can ask, "What was I just thinking that made me afraid? What are the thoughts that created this fear?" Asking this question summons the rational side of yourself and brings it to the forefront and undermines the ego's hold. To answer this question, you must align with the part of you that is objective and rational. In other words, you're choosing to activate your prefrontal cortex. This wise, rational self is, of course, your true self. Isn't it interesting that you can use one part of your brain to see through another part of your brain, the primitive, irrational side, which is the ego? We can use terms from neuroscience to speak about the duality in human nature. This duality, the ego and your true self, are reflected in distinct areas of the brain. I'm not saying that consciousness is located in a particular area of your brain. Rather, it uses the brain. But your ego is. It's part of your neural programming. The reason for this inquiry is to help you see the truth about fears. They're created by thoughts. As I've said before, fears are made up and not based on reality, and therefore lies. By examining the thoughts behind your fears, the lies behind your fears are exposed. You might argue that those thoughts are true. However, they're true only from the ego's perspective. They may be a little true or partly true, which is why they seem true, but partial truths aren't much use and are essentially lies. If those thoughts were completely false, seeing that they're lies would be much easier. But like all good con men and liars, the voice in your head mixes some truth in with the lies to fool you. The ego's so-called truth is a certain perspective that leaves so much out, which is why it's a lie. For instance, I'm a failure is a lie for 2 reasons. You can't be a failure. You don't exist, and failure is a concept. And you don't always fail. Even one instance of success would make this a lie. Recognizing that the thoughts behind your fears and negative emotions are incomplete and therefore lies and useless is how you weaken and ultimately pull the plug on those emotions. Once you start examining your thoughts this way, you'll see why the word illusion is often used to describe the world the ego creates and lives in. The ego sees life and the world through a lens that distorts and therefore deludes. It lives in an illusory world of its own imagination. You live in this mind-made virtual reality until you see the truth about it. Another thing you can do while you're sitting with the sensations of an emotion is talk to it, dialogue with it, find out what it has to say. This is similar to inquiring into the beliefs behind fear, but dialoguing has a tendency to uncover things that might not be revealed through inquiry. Dialoguing with an emotion often reveals unconscious material because what you're actually dialoguing with is the unconscious mind. Such a dialogue is an invitation to the unconscious mind to reveal things to you. When you make such an invitation and show a willingness to receive material from the unconscious mind, you just might. This material arrives as ahas, a download, an insight, or some other nonverbal flash of knowing. Or an image or a memory from your early life or a previous lifetime might pop into your mind that helps you understand why you feel the way you do or why you believe what you do. When you invite the unconscious mind to reveal its contents, it will do so in a safe and appropriate way. There's nothing to be afraid of about this process. This is how emotional healing happens. These are the simple ways you can effectively work with and heal your fear. And of course, you can also get professional help from someone who's knowledgeable about these things. As I said before, past life regression therapy can be very helpful, and certainly those who specialize in trauma can help when there's been trauma. If you've experienced abuse or neglect in your childhood and not worked with a professional before, then it's likely you need to do some of this emotional work with someone who can help guide you. Fear is not your friend, but it's also not your enemy. Fear is nothing to be afraid of. It isn't powerful except when you think it is. You are powerful. You are what can choose to give your fearful thoughts your attention or not. You are what can choose to believe them or not. You are the one who can take control from the ego. You are the one who must choose to do this, in fact. No one else can choose this for you. At a certain point, the true self wakes up in you and begins to deconstruct the ego and its lies, and it begins to see the truth and choose the truth. Most of you listening to this are at this point. You are ready to move forward and let go of your painful and limiting thoughts and fears, and begin to trust the beautiful being that you are, and allow it to unfold your life. You are meant to be happy. Please relax, trust, and know that you are in good hands, God's hands. And feel free to call on me and others like me to help you on your way. Thank you for your openness. Thank you for being here. I am with you always.